Chapter 1: The Door That Breathes. Welcome back, Night Owls. If you're new here, hit that subscribe button now, because what you're about to hear is pulled from declassified Vatican files, whispered confessions, and events that even historians refuse to put in writing, based on true stories from the heart of the Catholic Church, stories they pray you never connect. Tonight, we begin a descent that took one man 15 nights to survive. Barely. This is the story of Father Luca Moretti and the door that was never meant to open. In the dead heart of Rome, beneath the golden dome of St. Peter's Basilica, lies a labyrinth most people will never see, the Vatican's secret archives. Not the pretty reading room tourists glimpse on guided tours. No, the real archives. Miles of shelves stretching into darkness, holding over 50 miles of shelving and 35,000 volumes of catalog alone. The air down here is always cold, thick with the dust of centuries, carrying that faint, metallic tang of old ink and older sins. At night, when the last scholar has gone and the guards make their rounds with flashlights cutting through the gloom, the archives feel less like a library and more like a tomb that's forgotten. It's supposed to stay dead. Father Luca Moretti knew these corridors better than most. 38 years old, ordained in Milan, transferred to the Vatican 3 years ago for his gift with ancient languages, Latin, Aramaic, even the forgotten dialects of Coptic monks. He was the one they called when a manuscript arrived too fragile, too cursed for ordinary eyes. Luca wasn't afraid of the dark. He told himself that every night as he worked late, surrounded by scrolls that whispered of plagues and possessions, of popes who made pacts in blood. The dark was just absence of light, nothing more. But on this night, November 22nd, 2025, something changed. It was 3:33 a.m. exactly. Luca remembered because his watch beeped softly, the only sound in the cavernous hall. He was cataloging a box of documents from the 1960s, papers yellowed with age, edges crumbling like dead leaves. The Second Vatican Council files, harmless, mostly, debates about Latin Mass, modernization, opening the church to the world. He'd been at it for hours, the kind of monotonous work that made your eyes burn and your mind wander. That's when he heard it, not with his ears at first, with his chest, a pressure, like the air itself was inhaling, slow, deliberate, the kind of breath you take when you're trying not to be noticed. Luca froze, his gloved hand hovering over a folder labeled Acta et Documenta. The sound came again, deeper this time. From behind the wall to his left, a section of stone that should have been solid. Unremarkable, just another stretch of ancient masonry in a building full of them. He stood slowly, his chair scraping against the marble floor like a scream in the silence. The archives were temperature controlled, always 18 degrees Celsius, but suddenly the air felt warmer, thicker. He approached the wall, his flashlight beam trembling slightly as it played across the stone. Nothing, no vents, no seams, just centuries-old brickwork, darkened by time and candle smoke from eras when electricity was a dream. Then it happened again, closer now. The stone itself seemed to expand, not crack or shift, breathe, a rhythmic swelling, as if something massive on the other side was filling its lungs with the stale air of the archives. Luca pressed his ear to the wall. The sound was wet, organic, like lungs lined with moss and mildew, drawing in the scent of forgotten prayers. His heart hammered against his ribs. This wasn't possible. The archives were mapped, remapped, secured. He'd seen the blueprints himself. There was nothing behind that wall but more storage, or so the official plans claimed. But Luca had always been curious, too curious. His superiors said. That's why they kept him down here, away from the public eye. He ran his fingers along the stone, searching for anything out of place, and that's when he found it. Not a seam, not a crack, a door. It materialized almost as if the wall had decided to reveal it. A slab of brushed steel, modern and cold, embedded flush with the ancient stone. No handle at first glance, no markings, just a small keyhole and a date etched faintly into the metal. 18 was 1965, December 8th, 1965. The exact day the Second Vatican Council ended. The day Pope Paul VI closed the gathering that changed the Church forever. Luca knew the date by heart. Every seminarian did. But why seal a door on that day? And why hide it so completely that even the head archivist denied its existence? He should have walked away, reported it in the morning, filled out the proper forms. But the breathing had stopped. In the sudden silence, Luca became aware of another sound. Footsteps, soft, deliberate, approaching from the corridor behind him. He turned, flashlight swinging wildly, catching the edge of a black habit. Sister Chiara. She was ancient, 80 if she was a day, one of the cloistered nuns who tended the archives, like guardians of some sacred crypt. Her face was a map of wrinkles, eyes milky with cataracts, but they fixed on Luca with startling clarity. She moved without sound, her rosary beads clicking faintly against her side. Father Moretti, she whispered, her voice like dry leaves scraping across stone. You weren't meant to find it. Luca's mouth went dry. Sister, this door, it's not on any plans. The date. The day the church opened to the world, she said, her lips barely moving. Some things were closed forever in exchange. Some doors. She reached out, her gnarled hand trembling as it hovered inches from the steel. Some doors are locked from the inside. The words hung in the air like frost. Luca felt the hairs on his neck rise. What do you mean, from the inside? Sister Chiara's eyes darted to the keyhole. Because whatever's behind it doesn't want to get out. It wants to be left alone. There are relics down there. Father, things the church took from places it should never have gone. Things that took something back. She was close now. Close enough that Luca could smell the lavender water she used, mixed with something older, something like grave soil. You mustn't touch it, she hissed. Promise me, some nights, when the moon is right, you can hear them. The ones who went through before, they're still screaming. But the door, it muffles the sound, keeps it contained. Luca should have listened. Every instinct screamed at him to step back, to forget this night ever happened, but the scholar in him, the part that had devoted his life to uncovering hidden truths, wouldn't let go. His hand moved almost of its own accord, fingers brushing the cold steel, and that's when the door exhaled. Not a draft, not imagination. A warm, moist gust of air rushed out from the seams that hadn't been there moments before. It carried the heavy scent of myrrh and frankincense, the incense used in exorcisms, mixed with something fouler. The sweet rot smell of flesh left too long in sacred ground. The air wrapped around Luca's face like a lover's breath, intimate and wrong. He gagged, stumbling back as the warmth slid down his throat, coating his lungs. The keyhole began to glow, not with light, with heat. The etched date shimmered like it had been freshly burned into the metal. Click. The sound was soft, final. The lock turned by itself. Sister Chiara made a sound, part sob, part prayer, as she backed away, crossing herself frantically. Dio ci salvi, she whispered. God save us. It's begun again. The door stood ajar now, just a finger's width. From the darkness beyond came that breathing again, slower, deeper, patient, waiting. Luca stood frozen, flashlight trembling in his grip, illuminating a sliver of absolute black that seemed to drink the light. Somewhere in that darkness, something shifted, not a footstep, something larger. Sister Chiara was already fleeing, her habit whispering against the stone as she vanished into the corridors, leaving Luca alone with the door that had just unlocked itself after 60 years. His hand hovered over the edge. The metal was warm now, almost feverish. If you were standing there, right now, with that door breathing your name in the dark, would you step through? Because Luca did. Chapter 2, The Third Secret, Written in Blood. The door didn't creak when Luca pushed it wider. It sighed, a long, wet exhale that tasted of copper and candle smoke, as though the air itself had been holding its breath for 60 years and was finally relieved to let it go. His flashlight cut a narrow tunnel through absolute black, revealing a narrow staircase spiraling down. The steps were modern concrete, but the walls were ancient tufa stone, glistening with condensation that ran in slow, dark tears somewhere far below. Water dripped in perfect rhythm, one drop every 3 seconds, like a metronome counting sins. Luca should have turned back the moment the door sealed behind him with a soft pneumatic hiss. No handle on this side. But curiosity is a crueler master than fear, and the scholar in him whispered that whatever waited below had been hidden the day the church decided to face the modern world. December 8th, 1965, the day Vatican II closed, the day the old Latin Mass began to die, the day something was buried so deep no one would ever find it. He descended 33 steps. He counted them because priests count everything. Beads, sins, heartbeats when you're trying not to panic. At the bottom, another steel door, this one unmarked except for a single word etched in hurried Latin, Fatima. The paint was flaking, but the letters looked freshly carved, as if the metal itself had tried to erase them and failed. Inside was a small chamber no larger than a confessional, one steel table, one halogen lamp on a timer that flickered to life the moment he crossed the threshold, bathing everything in sickly surgical white. On the table lay a single object beneath a glass dome, a rolled parchment the color of old bone, sealed with black wax, impressed by the papal ring of Pius XII. Luca's breath fogged the glass. He had read every published version of The Third Secret of Fatima, the one released in $2,000, 25 lines about a bishop in white being shot. The church suffering, penance, penance, penance. Harmless, vague, comforting, even. But the rumors among the archivists were darker. The real secret, they whispered, was never meant for the faithful. It was locked away because it named names. He lifted the dome. The parchment unrolled with a sound like dry wings. It wasn't paper. The texture was wrong, soft, faintly warm, with the faint ridges of pores long since closed. Human skin, vellum made from a single sheet, tanned and stretched until it was almost translucent. The handwriting was Sister Lucia's unmistakable childish script, but the ink was dark brown, flaking at the edges. Iron gall, maybe, or blood. Luca began to read silently. The first 25 lines matched the published version exactly. Then came the rest. Line 26. The great apostasy will begin at the top. Line 31. A pope under the control of Satan will sit upon the throne of Peter. Line 37. Cardinals will lie with cardinals, bishops with bishops, and the smoke of Satan will enter the sanctuary. Line 49. The Holy Father will command the consecration of Russia, but it will come too late, and the errors will have spread through the world like fire through dry stubble. Line 55. In the end, my Immaculate Heart will triumph, but only after the Church has been crucified anew by her own shepherds. Line 62, the final line, written larger, pressed so deep the quill had torn the skin. Pray for the Pope who will open what was sealed. His name will be the last. Luca's mouth went dry. He didn't realize he had started reading aloud until the words left his lips like smoke. The moment the final syllable fell, the parchment bled, not metaphorically. Fresh blood welled up from the letters themselves, bright arterial red, spreading outward in perfect circles until the entire sheet glistened wet. The metallic smell hit him like a slap. He stumbled back, the glass dome crashing to the floor and shattering into 1,000 glittering shards that looked, in the harsh light, like frozen tears. His scream echoed off the walls, but the chamber swallowed it whole. That was when he noticed the rosary. Sister Chiara's rosary, the one she always clutched like a lifeline, lay on the corner of the table, half hidden beneath a folded linen cloth. He had seen it 1,000 times, black bead carved into tiny skulls, the crucifix worn smooth by decades of terrified fingers. But now, in the bleeding light, he saw the truth. The beads weren't ebony. They were the same skin as the parchment, desiccated, polished by years of handling, but unmistakable. The pores were still visible under the lamp, and when he picked it up, God forgive him, he picked it up. The beads were warm, body temperature. A memory flashed unbidden. Sister Chiara pressing that rosary into his palm the night he arrived at the Vatican. For protection, she had whispered. From what? He had asked. She had only smiled, toothless and ancient. From what you'll find when you start looking. His hands shook so badly, the beads clicked together like teeth. One of them split open under the pressure, revealing a sliver of yellowed bone inside, a finger joint, maybe, or a toe, a relic within a relic. He dropped the rosary as if it burned. Behind him, the parchment kept bleeding. The blood had reached the edge of the table and was dripping onto the concrete in thick, deliberate drops. Each impact sounded like a heartbeat. Drip, 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 and with every drop, the temperature in the chamber rose, not gradually, suddenly, violently, as though a furnace door had opened somewhere deeper. The air thickened with the stench of hot iron and wet earth after rain. Luca's collar was soaked with sweat. His cassock clung to his skin like a second, suffocating layer. He backed toward the door, but the staircase was gone. Where the entrance had been, there was only smooth stone wall, seamless and damp, as if the door had never existed. The breathing he had heard upstairs was here now, all around him, inside the walls, inside his skull, a low Latin chant, barely audible, rising and falling with the rhythm of the blood. Et ne nos inducas in tentationem, sed libera nos a malo. Over and over, faster and faster, until the words blurred into a single, wet roar. Luca pressed his hands to his ears, but the chant was in his blood now, in the pulse hammering at his temples. He sank to his knees among the glass shards, cutting his palms, his own blood mingling with the parchments until he couldn't tell whose was whose on the table. The final line of the secret had rewritten itself in fresh crimson. His name will be Luca. If you were kneeling there, covered in blood that wasn't all yours, hearing your own name written by a hand that died in 2005, what would you do? Scream for help that would never come, or keep reading? Because the secret wasn't finished with you yet? Because somewhere deeper, something was already climbing the stairs that no longer existed, coming for the priest who had finally opened what should have stayed sealed. Chapter 3. The Chronovisor's Last Tape. The blood on Luca's hands had already dried into a dark, flaking crust by the time he found the strength to stand. The parchment lay curled at his feet like a dead thing, its accusations soaked back into the skin it came from. The chamber felt smaller now, the walls pressing in with the weight of 60 years of silence. But the staircase had returned, just a faint outline in the stone, a seam that hadn't been there moments before, a way deeper, always deeper. He didn't remember deciding to move. His legs simply carried him forward, down another flight that spiraled tighter, the air growing thicker with every turn. The temperature dropped sharply, as if he'd stepped into a crypt left open to mountain winter. His breath came in white puffs that hung in the flashlight beam like ghosts refusing to dissipate. The whispering followed him, no longer Latin, but something older, Aramaic, maybe the language of Christ. The syllables slithered along the walls, just beneath hearing, like fingernails dragging across velvet. At the bottom, a heavier door, riveted iron, the kind used for bank vaults in the 1950s. A faded stenciled warning in Italian, Proprietà Segreta Vaticana, Divieto di Accesso, beneath it. Someone had scratched a single word in fresh grooves. Ernetti, Father Pellegrino Ernetti. The name every seminarian learned to laugh about in hushed tones. The Benedictine monk who claimed to have built a machine that could tune into the past like a television tuned to yesterday. Officially debunked, ridiculed, the Vatican denied it ever existed, but here was the door, and here was Luca, bleeding from both palms like a bad stigmata joke. Pushing it open because stopping now felt more dangerous than going on. The room beyond was larger, colder, lit by a single red bulb that swung gently from the ceiling on a frayed cord. In the center sat the machine. It looked nothing like the sleek, sci-fi contraption the tabloids imagined. No glowing dials or humming coils, just a hulking cabinet of walnut and brass the size of a confessional, its front dominated by a cathode ray tube the color of old bone, dials labeled in Latin, anno, mensis, dies, hora, thick cables snaked from the back into the stone floor like roots burrowing for something buried deeper. A reel-to-reel tape deck sat on a side table, dust motes dancing in the red light above a single spool labeled in Ernetti's spidery hand, Golgotha, non-redigere, do not play. Of course, Luca played it. His fingers left bloody prints on the plastic reel as he threaded the tape. The machine woke with a cough of dust and ozone, the smell of burnt insulation and old sacraments. The tube flickered to life, bathing the room in corpse green light. Static hissed like serpents, then resolved into an image so sharp it hurt. Jerusalem, not the sanitized Passion Play version with clean robes and soft focus suffering. The real hill, Golgotha, stinking of sweat and vinegar and sun-baked blood. The sky was the color of a bruise. 3 crosses. The middle one held a man who looked nothing like the serene Renaissance Christs in every cathedral. This Jesus was broken, ribs showing through torn flesh, face swollen almost beyond recognition, eyes rolled back to whites. Blood poured from the crown of thorns in thick rivulets that steamed in the heat. Luca's knees buckled. He had expected a miracle. He got agony. The camera, whatever impossible lens Ernetti had built, zoomed slowly, mercilessly, on the dying man's lips. They moved, not the 7 last words every child memorizes, something else. One sentence in Aramaic, rasped through a throat full of blood and dust. Luca leaned closer, the green light turning his skin the color of gangrene. Eloi, Eloi, lema sabachthani? No, that was Matthew's version. This was different. The lips formed the words again, clearer now, as if the machine itself was enhancing the audio, pulling the sound across 2 millennia, like a fisherman reeling in a drowning man. Father, the keys, they will open the wrong door. The moment the final syllable left the dying mouth, the tape ignited, not melted, ignited. Real flames, orange and hungry, leaping from the reel with a whoosh that sucked the air from Luca's lungs. He stumbled back as the fire roared upward, impossibly tall, painting the walls with dancing shadows of crucified men. The heat was immediate, blistering. He threw up an arm to shield his face, screaming as the smell of burning celluloid mixed with something worse, cooking meat, old incense, the copper tang of blood. But the screen didn't die through the flames. The image shifted, Jerusalem dissolved in static, replaced by something that froze Luca's scream in his throat. St. Peter's Square. Today. No, tonight. The obelisk cast a long shadow across the cobblestones under floodlights. Thousands of people filled the piazza, phones raised, faces illuminated by camera flashes like a sea of judgment, and in the center, raised on a makeshift cross between the fountains, was Luca himself, naked except for the cassock torn to rags, nails through wrists and feet, real iron dripping. His mouth opens in a silent scream. The date stamp in the corner of the screen burned white, 22 to November 2025, or 23:47, less than 20 minutes from now. The flames reached the tape deck. Sparks flew. The machine began to whine, a high-pitched keen like a soul being flayed. Luca lunged for the power switch, but his hand passed through empty air. The cabinet was already dissolving, wood charring to black lace, brass melting into molten tears that hissed on the stone floor. The last thing the screen showed before it exploded in a shower of glass and fire was his own face on the cross, turning toward the camera, toward him, and mouthing a single word, "Run." Then darkness, absolute. The red bulb had burst. The only light came from the burning remnants of the tape, curling like blackened tongues on the floor. In that darkness, something moved, so not the fire, something else. A shape detaching itself from the corner where no shape had been. Tall, robed, the smell of scorched flesh and frankincense so thick Luca gagged. It whispered the sentence Jesus had spoken, the real one, the one the Gospels never recorded. The Aramaic words slithered into Luca's ears like worms, burrowing deep. He ran, up the stairs that hadn't existed minutes ago, lungs on fire, bare feet slipping in his own blood. Behind him, the whisper followed, gaining, shaping itself into a voice he almost recognized. He burst through the iron door into the chamber of the bleeding secret. The parchment was gone. Only a dark stain on the table remained, shaped disturbingly like a door. And on the wall, freshly scratched as if by fingernails dipped in blood, were the words the machine had burned into his mind. The keys will open the wrong door. If you were Luca right now, running through corridors that rearranged themselves when you blinked, hearing your own crucifixion playing on a loop inside your skull, knowing you had less than 20 minutes before St. Peter's Square became Golgotha again, where would you hide? Because whatever Ernetti filmed wasn't the past. It was tonight, and it was coming. Chapter 4, The Hand That Still Judges. Luca didn't remember climbing the last flight of stairs. One moment, he was fleeing the burning chronovisor. The next, he was staggering into a narrow corridor lit by a single votive candle that somehow refused to die. The flame stood perfectly still, no flicker, no dance, as though even fire feared to move here. The walls were no longer modern concrete. They were ancient bricks, weeping moisture that smelled of myrrh and mortification every 10 paces. A small niche held a glass ampule containing a single drop of blood, labels in faded Latin, S. Ignatius, S. Lorenzo, S. Agatha. The blood inside was still liquid, still red, still watching. He was deeper than any official level of the apostolic palace. The air pressure felt wrong, too heavy, like descending into a catacomb that had never been meant for the living. His watch had stopped at 23:47, the exact minute the chronovisor predicted his crucifixion. The second hand trembled but refused to advance, caught in an endless stutter. A door appeared ahead, small and humpbacked, the kind you find in medieval monasteries, where the brothers had to bow to enter. The wood was blackened oak, bound with iron straps that looked freshly hammered. A brass plaque read, Manus Sancti Piscis non tangere, 1903-1914, Pope Pius VI, the saint who fought modernism like it was the devil himself, the Pope who lowered the age of First Communion to 7 because he believed children were never too young to taste God, the Pope whose body, when exhumed in 1944, was found incorrupt, skin soft, joints flexible, eyes still bright. They had taken more than photographs that day. Luca's legs carried him forward again. He told himself he was looking for an exit, for help, for anything that made sense. But the truth, the shameful, hungry truth, was that something was pulling him, a hook behind his sternum, reeling him in like a fish that had swallowed the wrong bait. The door opened before he touched it. Inside was a circular chapel no larger than a prison cell. The ceiling was a low dome, painted with faded frescoes of the Last Judgment, souls being weighed, demons with pitchforks, the blessed ascending in white robes. In the center, on a pedestal of black marble, stood the reliquary. It was beautiful in the way a guillotine is beautiful, perfectly designed for its purpose. A crystal cylinder 6 inches tall, filled with distilled alcohol that glowed faintly gold under the candlelight. Suspended inside, palm up, was a human right hand severed cleanly at the wrist. The skin was pale wax, veins faintly blue, nails trimmed short. The fingers were curled gently, as if the hand had been caught mid-blessing. Luca had seen reliquaries before, pieces of the true cross, tongues of martyrs, the jawbone of Saint Anthony. They were dead things preserved in holiness. This was different. This hand looked expectant. He stepped closer. The alcohol should have preserved it perfectly, but there were details that made his stomach lurch. The cut at the wrist was not clean. It was ragged, as though the bone had been sawn while the Pope still lived. Tiny scars crossed the back like tally marks, and the fingertips, they were stained faint purple, the color of old bruises. A plaque beneath the reliquary, in Pius X's own handwriting, read, Haec manus peccata non ignorat. This hand does not ignore sins. Luca laughed, a short, broken sound, hysteria or blasphemy. He wasn't sure. The laugh died the moment the fingers twitched, not a trick of the light, a deliberate flex. The index finger straightened, then curled again, like a priest testing the weight of an invisible host. Luca's breath caught. He hadn't moved, hadn't spoken, hadn't even thought. The hand twitched again, harder, the middle finger now, then the ring finger. A ripple traveled through the palm as though something beneath the skin was remembering how to move. The alcohol bubbled softly, tiny pearls rising around the wrist stump. Luca's mind raced for rational explanations, temperature change, trapped gases, hallucination from the smoke. But he knew, deep in the animal part of his brain that still believed in demons, he knew. The hand was reacting to him, to his thoughts. He tested it without meaning to. A memory surfaced unbidden. Milan, 2011, a married woman named Sophia in the confessional who had lingered too long after absolution, her hand brushing his knee by accident. The moments the image formed, the hand convulsed, all 5 fingers splayed wide, slamming against the crystal with a dull thunk that echoed like a judge's gavel. The alcohol sloshed violently. Luca jerked back, heart slamming against his ribs. No, he whispered, that was forgiven years ago. Another memory, pride, the secret satisfaction when Cardinal Dresner praised his work last month, the fantasy of red silk and a mitre of his own. The hand curled into a fist, knuckles whitening, then unclenched with a snap that cracked the alcohol's surface tension. It was reading him. Every impure glance in the seminary showers, every lie to a penitent, Every time he had skipped the divine office to read forbidden books, the hand knew them all, cataloged them, judged them. Luca's knees buckled, so he fell hard, palms slapping the stone floor, blood from his earlier cuts smeared beneath him. He tried to empty his mind, to think of nothing but the paternoster. But the harder he prayed, the more the sins crowded in, like rats fleeing a flood. The hand began to pound the crystal in rhythm with his heartbeat. Thud, 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 faster. The pedestal vibrated. Dust sifted from the frescoed dome above. He crawled forward on hands and knees, unable to stop himself. Please, he begged the hand, the saint, the god who had abandoned this place. I'm sorry, I confess. The hand went still. For one blessed second, Luca thought it was mercy. Then the fingers uncurled slowly, deliberately, and reached through the crystal, not broke through, reached. The glass rippled like water, the alcohol parting as the hand extended into the air of the chapel, dripping golden droplets that hissed where they touched the floor. The skin was warm, alive, veins pulsing faintly beneath the surface. Luca tried to scream, but the sound lodged in his throat. The hand hovered inches from his face, palm up, waiting. He knew what it wanted, trembling. He extended his own wrist. The saint's fingers closed around it with surprising gentleness, like a father correcting a wayward son. Then the grip tightened, bones ground together. The pain was immediate, white hot. The hand twisted his arm until the underside of his forearm faced up, skin stretched taut with the precision of a scribe. The index finger pressed into his flesh. It wrote, not with ink, with pressure, each letter a bruised blooming violet beneath the skin, raised and perfect. The pain was surgical, intimate. Luca felt the ridges of the fingerprints as they carved their message into him, letter by letter, L-U-C-A then, beneath his name. A date, 24 April 1987, the day he was born. The hand released him. Luca collapsed, sobbing, cradling his arm. The bruises stood out livid against his skin, already darkening to black. The letters looked branded, permanent. He could feel them throbbing in time with his pulse. Above him, the hand slowly withdrew back into its crystal prison. The alcohol sealed over it without a ripple. The fingers curled once more into that gentle blessing pose, as innocent as a museum piece. But the message was clear. Judgment had already been passed, long before tonight, long before he ever touched the first forbidden door. From somewhere deeper in the vaults, a clock began to strike midnight, 12 slow, mournful chimes that vibrated through the stone like funeral bells. Luca looked at the bruises spelling his name and birthday, and understood with sudden, sickening clarity. He had never been the one doing the judging. He was the one being prepared. Chapter 5. The Inquisitor's Pentagram of Bones. Luca fled the chapel on hands and knees, the bruises on his forearm throbbing like fresh brands. Behind him, the votive candle finally guttered out, as if the hand had decided light itself was a mercy no longer permitted. The corridor ahead narrowed into a rough-hewn tunnel that smelled of turned earth and old smoke, the scent of pyres that never quite went cold. The walls here were no longer brick or concrete. They were bone, not metaphor, actual human bone, tibiae and femora stacked like cordwood, radii laced through eye sockets in neat cruciform patterns. The catacombs beneath the Vatican are famous, But tourists only see the pretty ones, the sanitized corridors with neat little plaques. This was deeper, older, a level the guides deny exists. Here the dead had been rearranged, not buried. Luca's flashlight picked out details he wished it hadn't. A child's skull, used as a keystone, a pelvic bone carved with the initials of a pope who reigned for 17 days, and everywhere, the faint gleam of gold leaf, tiny fragments of reliquaries pried loose and pressed into mortar like obscene decoration. He forced himself upright, one palm against the wall for balance. The bones were cold, but not cold enough. They radiated a dull heat, like stones left in afternoon sun. His bruised arm brushed a rib, and the bone shifted with a soft click, as though grateful for the touch. The tunnel opened into a chamber that stole his breath. It was vast, circular, the ceiling lost in darkness. In the center of the floor, laid out with architectural precision, was a perfect five-pointed star, a pentagram, 20 feet across. But it had been constructed entirely from one man's skeleton, Cardinal Roberto Bellarmino, the inquisitor who condemned Giordano Bruno to the stake in 1600. The theologian who declared heliocentrism heresy, the man whose personal library contained more banned books than any cardinal before or since. His bones had gone missing from his tomb in the Gesù in 1930 during renovations. The church claimed they were reinterred elsewhere. They lied. Every bone was here. The skull at the top point, jaw wired shut with silver thread. The spine formed the central pentagon, vertebrae clicking faintly as air currents moved through the chamber. Arms and legs stretched to the four lower points. Fingers and toes splayed like rays. Each rib had been removed individually and driven into the stone floor like stakes. Pointing outward toward 5 sealed iron doors set into the walls at perfect 60-degree intervals. 24 ribs, 24 doors originally. 4 had been opened long ago, 1 rib missing from each opened vault, as though the skeleton itself had paid the toll. The bones were clean, picked white by time or something hungrier, but they were wrong. Joints articulated too smoothly, as if the skeleton had been posed while the ligaments were still soft, and the color, not the dull yellow of old bone, but ivory flushed with pink. Luca's flashlight trembled across the ribcage, and the beams caught on something wet. A sheen, moisture. The bones were sweating. He took one involuntary step closer. The air in the chamber was warmer than the tunnel, thick with the copper penny smell of fresh blood and the acrid bite of incense burned centuries ago. His foot came down on something that crunched. He looked a fragment of rib, snapped clean. It hadn't been there a second ago. Then the skull moved, not a trick of light. The cervical vertebrae rotated with a soft, grinding pop, the silver wire in the jaw creaking as the head turned 180 degrees to face him. Empty eye sockets fixed on Luca with impossible focus. The jaw dropped open, threads snapping like spider silk. A voice came out, not from the throat that no longer existed, but from the bones themselves. It was dry, papery, the sound of parchment dragged across gravel. It spoke in perfect Tuscan Italian, the accent of 1600, Luca Moretti. It rasped. You smell of pride. You smell of doubt. You smell of the woman in Milan who still lights candles for the child you told her to abort. The words hit harder than any fist. Luca staggered, the flashlight clattering from his hand and spinning across the floor, throwing wild shadows that looked like wings. The skull kept talking, voice echoing from every rib at once, a chorus of dead bone. That sin will kill you, priest, not the lust, the lie. You told her God would forgive. You told yourself the same, but God keeps receipts. The ribs began to vibrate, one by one, starting from the sternum. They wrenched free of the stone with wet sucking sounds, like teeth pulled from gums. They rose into the air, hovering, pointing. 5 ribs now floated toward the 5 remaining doors, quivering like compass needles, seeking north. Luca backed away until his shoulders hit the wall of stacked femora. They shifted under his weight, clicking like dominoes. The floating ribs darted to the doors, embedding themselves with sharp cracks, keys made of bone unlocking locks made of guilt. One door swung open on screaming hinges, darkness beyond, thick as oil. The skull grinned, an expression no skeleton should be capable of. Choose, it whispered. One door for each sin you still carry. Behind one is escape, behind the others. The fires you sentenced so many to. Bellarmino knows fire. He invented new kinds. Luca's legs gave out. He slid down the wall of bones, feeling them press against his back, warm, almost feverish. His fingers brushed the floor and came away slick. Not dust, not water. Blood, seeping from the stones beneath the pentagram, spreading in perfect geometric lines that followed the star's points. It was warm, body temperature, and it was rising. He looked at his hands in horror. The bruises from Pius X's grip had split open. Blood welled in the letters of his name, dripping onto the floor and joining the growing pool. The skeleton was bleeding him into itself. The skull's voice dropped to a lover's intimacy. Pick a door, little priest, or stay here and become another rib. The star is missing 4, after all. The floating ribs quivered impatiently. From the open door came a blast of heat and the distant roar of flames that sounded almost human. Luca crawled forward on bleeding palms, the blood trail behind him forming a perfect arrow toward the pentagram's heart. He reached the edge of the star and looked up at the skull one last time. It was smiling with teeth it no longer possessed. If you were on your knees in a lake of your own blood, surrounded by a skeleton that knew every secret you ever burned a heretic to hide, which door would you choose? Because Luca chose one, and the bones followed him through. Chapter 6. The Black Madonna Who Weeps Living Blood. Luca stumbled through the iron door the floating rib had chosen, and the pentagram collapsed behind him, with a sound like a spine snapping in half. The bones did not fall, they folded, compacting into a tight ball that rolled after him across the threshold, clicking and clattering like a dog made of ivory. The door slammed shut on its own, severing the ball in 2. One half stayed on the catacomb's side, still twitching. The other half followed him into the new corridor, trailing blood that wasn't his. The air changed immediately. Gone was the dry heat of the Inquisitor's chamber. Here it was damp, cool, almost reverent, the way the basilica feels at 4 a.m. when the cleaners haven't arrived yet, and the only light comes from the eternal flame. The walls were smooth basalt now, black and glossy, reflecting his flashlight like a dark mirror. Every few steps, small niches held fresh roses, white petals edged with brown, as if they'd been dying for centuries but refused to drop. Their scent was overpowering, funereal, sweet, edged with something metallic underneath. The half-skeleton rolled ahead of him, leading the way like a grotesque pilgrim. It stopped at a wooden door bound in iron and studded with nails the size of railroad spikes. Above the lintel, carved deep into the stone, was a single word in Polish, Częstochowa, the Black Madonna, Our Lady of Częstochowa, the holiest icon in Poland, credited with saving the nation from Swedes, Russians, Nazis, miracles stacked upon miracles. The one in Jasna Gora Monastery draws millions every year. Her face slashed by Hussite swords in 1430, the scars still visible beneath centuries of soot and gold. But this was not that icon. This was the one that had been removed from the monastery in 1944 for safekeeping during the German advance, the one the Vatican quietly kept when the war ended, the one no pilgrim has ever seen. The skeleton ball wedged itself under the door like a doorstop made of sacrilege. The nails glowed dull red, then cooled. The door swung inward on silent hinges. Luca stepped into a chapel that should not have fit beneath Rome. It was long and narrow, built like the inside of a coffin stood on end, black marble floor veined with gold, vaulted ceiling painted midnight blue and studded with tiny chips of diamond that caught the light like cold stars. At the far end, on an altar of solid onyx, stood the icon. She was life-size, almost 6 feet tall, framed in gold and pearls that looked wet, as if they'd just been pulled from the sea. The Madonna's skin was the deep ebony of old olive wood, her mantle the color of dried blood under centuries of lampblack and the incense. The scars on her cheek were real gashes, not paint, deep enough that you could hide a coin in them. Her eyes were painted wide, dark, ancient, and she was weeping, not painted tears, real ones. 2 steady tracks of crimson ran from the corners of her eyes, down the scarred cheek, over the gold frame, pooling on the altar in a viscous puddle that reflected the candlelight like fresh oil. Luca's mouth went dry. He had seen weeping statues before, condensation tricks, capillary action, hoaxers with hidden tubes. This was different. The tears fell in perfect rhythm, one every 7 seconds, the same rhythm as the dripping he'd heard far above in the first chamber, the same heartbeat. He approached on knees that no longer felt like his own. The skeleton ball had dissolved into dust behind him, leaving only a faint outline of ribs on the marble, warm to the touch, up close. The icon was overwhelming. The tears carried heat. He could feel it on his face like standing too close to a furnace. The smell was unmistakable. Iron, salt, something faintly floral, blood, but not old blood, fresh. He shouldn't have touched it. Every instinct screamed at him to fall to his knees and pray, to beg forgiveness for every door he'd already opened. Instead, his hand rose of its own accord and lifted the silk veil that covered the lower half of the frame, a veil no pilgrim in Jasna Gora had ever seen removed. The tears increased. A third track joined the first 2, thick as syrup, sliding over the Madonna's chin and dripping onto his wrist. They were warm, body temperature. He brought his hand to his lips, without thinking, an old reflex from childhood, tasting a cut to see how bad it was. The tears tasted of iron and myrrh and something else, something that made his stomach lurch with recognition. He had tasted this blood before. In 1997, a secret Vatican laboratory beneath the Casina Pio Vafor had run unauthorized tests on scrapings taken from this very icon during a restoration no one was allowed to witness. The results were buried so deep they might as well have been damned. The DNA extracted from the paint layered over the scars contained 24 chromosomes, human, and 24 more that matched nothing in any known species on Earth. The eyes moved, not the slow tracking of a well-painted trompe-l'oeil, a deliberate shift. The pupils, painted black dots no larger than peppercorns, slid sideways to fix on him. The whites, yellowed with age, seemed to moisten. Then the lids, carved wood, for the love of God, lowered in a blink so slow it felt like an eternity, and rose again. Lucas screamed. The sound came out wet, strangled, as if the chapel itself had reached down his throat and squeezed. The face beneath the centuries of soot and grime was no longer the serene Byzantine Madonna. It was his mother's, not a resemblance, not a trick of grief and exhaustion, the exact face he remembered from childhood, the gentle slope of the cheekbones, the small mole beside the left eye, the mouth that had sung him to sleep in a cramped apartment in Milan while his father drank himself to death. The scars from the Hussite sword now crossed her cheek exactly where the car accident had torn her face in 1999, the night she died alone on a rain-slick road because her priest son was too busy with his first parish assignment to answer the phone. The tears were hers now. They fell faster, splashing onto the altar, onto his cassock, burning where they touched like acid laced with guilt. "Luca," the icon whispered, not with painted lips, but with his mother's voice, the one that called him Lucino when he was small and afraid of the dark. "You left me bleeding on the road. You left me." He fell to his knees in the puddle. It was ankle deep now, warm as a bath, rising with every heartbeat. The golden frame began to weep too, molten rivulets of metal running down like the icon itself was melting under the weight of maternal accusation. He tried to pray, Ave Maria, gratia plena, but the words turned to blood in his mouth. He spat red onto the marble. The Madonna's hand, the one holding the child, lifted from the wood, slowly, joints creaking like old doors. The fingers reached toward him, nails blackened with centuries of candle soot. They brushed his cheek, leaving streaks of blood and soot that burned like holy water on a demon. "You were supposed to save me," she said. "Instead, you saved yourself." The eyes blinked again, this time when they opened. They were empty sockets, black pits that went down forever, reflecting every confession he had ever heard and judged and filed away. The tears became a flood. If your own mother's face appeared on the holiest icon in the world, weeping the blood you never bothered to mourn, would you beg forgiveness? Or would you finally admit the truth that some sins are so old they've calcified into who you are? Because Luca admitted it. And the Madonna smiled with his mother's mouth, and the flood kept rising. Chapter 7, the missing page of the Devil's Bible. The flood of maternal blood never reached Luca's chin. It stopped inches from his lips, as though an invisible hand had cupped his face and said, "Not yet." The Madonna's eyes, his mother's eyes, closed one final time. The scars on her cheek sealing like fresh wounds, scabbed over by mercy or malice. The tears dried to black rivers on the wood. The veil fell back into place from nowhere, draping itself across the lower frame with the soft finality of a coffin lid. Luca was alone again. The chapel door stood open behind him, exhaling cold that smelled of parchment and brimstone. He crawled through on hands and knees, leaving bloody handprints that steamed on the stone. The corridor beyond was different, taller, wider, lined with shelves that stretched into absolute dark. Not shelves of books, shelves of chains. Iron links as thick as a man's wrist hung in neat coils, each one stained rust red at the ends. Some still held fragments, a finger bone here, a scrap of scalp there. The air tasted of iron filings and monk sweat. Somewhere far ahead, a bell tolled once, a cracked bronze note that made his teeth ache. His flashlight picked out a pedestal at the center of the aisle. On it rested a single page, folded into a perfect square no larger than a prayer card. The edges were blackened, as though it had been torn from a book that was already on fire. Codex Gigas, the Devil's Bible, the largest medieval manuscript in the world, written in the early 13th century by a single monk in a single night, or so the legend went. 1,200 pages of Latin scripture, medical texts, exorcism rites, and one full-page portrait of Satan himself, so vivid that readers went mad. But the codex on display in Stockholm is missing one page, torn out cleanly between the Book of Genesis and the portrait of the devil. The official story, lost to time, the unofficial story, whispered in the cloisters of Bohemia. The page was removed because it killed 9 monks in one night in 1295. They tried to read it aloud. Their tongues swelled, their eyes burst, and they wrote the words on each other's skin until there was nothing left to write with. Luca knew he should leave it folded. He unfolded it. The vellum was thick, almost hide, still supple after 8 centuries. The ink was blacker than any ink had a right to be, so black it seemed to drink the flashlight beam. There were no words at first, only a single illustration, a perfect circle divided by 9 radiating lines, like spokes on a wheel made of screams. At the center, a tiny hole where the umbilical cord of the book had once been. Then the ink began to move, not drip, crawl. Tiny legs of blackness detached from the page, scuttling like spiders made of pure night. They poured over the edges in a silent tide, pooling on the pedestal, then leaping the gap to the floor. Luca watched in paralyzed fascination as the first droplet touched his shoe and soaked through leather and skin in an instant. Cold fire raced up his leg. He tried to step back. His feet wouldn't obey. The ink had already reached his knees, climbing like ivy, like veins, like judgment. It reached his chest. The pain was exquisite, not burning. Worse, it felt like being written, each letter branded into muscle and bone with a quill made of ice and memory. The ink spelled words in languages that predated Babel, words that tasted of ash and forbidden fruit. He could feel them burrowing, nesting, rewriting the tissue of his heart. He tore at his cassock, ripping buttons, exposing skin already black with crawling script. The letters were forming a perfect replica of the missing page across his sternum, the nine-spoked wheel now centered directly over his heartbeat. With every pulse, the ink tightened, constricting like a second, darker ribcage. That was when the page screamed. Not one voice, 9. All at once, a Benedictine in Bohemian Latin, a Cistercian in Old High German, a Franciscan in medieval French, a Dominican in Church Slavonic. Their voices overlapped, harmonized, tore at each other like dogs fighting over a corpse. The sound wasn't in the air. It was inside his skull, inside the ink, inside the part of him that had always known Latin too well. Legimus et perimus, we read and we perished. Scripta manent, caro deletur. The writing remains, the flesh is deleted. To Arius decimus, you will be the 10th. The scream built into a chord that shattered the chains on the walls. Links exploded outward, whipping through the air like metallic serpents. One caught Luca across the cheek, opening a gash that wept black instead of red. The ink used the wound as a doorway, pouring in faster, threading through his arteries toward his heart. He fell to his knees in the center of the aisle, clutching at his chest as the wheel completed itself. 9 spokes, 9 voices, 9 monks who had tried to silence the page and only succeeded in becoming its ink. His vision tunneled. The last thing he saw before the darkness took him was the page on the pedestal, now blank, pristine, waiting for the next reader. When he came to, the ink had stopped moving. It lay across his skin like a tattoo from hell itself, raised and glistening. The wheel pulsed gently with his heartbeat, as though it had always belonged there. He could feel the 9 monks inside him now, curled around his heart like cats around a fire, purring in dead languages. The chains hung silent again. The page was gone, absorbed, perhaps, or simply waiting to be unfolded somewhere else. Luca stood on legs that no longer felt entirely his own. The cut on his cheek had sealed, but the skin around it was black now, part of the ever-growing manuscript. He touched the wheel over his heart. The voices stirred, hungry. If the missing page of the Devil's Bible decided to finish itself on your skin tonight, using your blood as ink and your sins as parchment, how many pages do you think it would take before there was nothing left of you to write on? Because for Luca, it had only just started the 2nd chapter, and the monks were patient. They had all eternity to edit. Chapter 8, The Borgia Ring That Remembers Poison. The ink on Luca's chest had settled into a dull throb, like a second heart trying to beat out of rhythm with the first. The 9 monks were quiet now, but he could feel them watching from the inside, waiting for the next word they could steal. He staggered onward, one hand pressed to the wheel branded over his sternum, the other trailing along the wall for balance. The stone here was warm and slick, as if the vaults themselves had a fever. The corridor ended at a small Renaissance studiolo, oak-paneled walls, a single velvet chair rotting to dust, a writing desk scarred by centuries of quill marks. On the desk sat a crystal dome no larger than a communion chalice. Beneath it, on a cushion of faded crimson, lay a ring, gold, heavy, Etruscan in style but unmistakably papal. The bezel was a perfect cabochon ruby the size of a child's eyeball, carved with the Borgia bull in intaglio. A tiny hinge, almost invisible, hid the compartment where the poison had once been kept. La Cantarella, arsenic, copper, and the ground hearts of stillborn lambs, or so the stories went. Pope Alexander VI had worn it to banquets, flicking death into goblets with a smile. Cesare and Lucrezia learned at his knee. Luca had studied the Borgias in seminary, the way medical students study cadavers, dispassionate, clinical, safe behind glass. He knew every rumor. The ring had disappeared the night Alexander died in 1503, bloated and black-tongued from his own poison, served by mistake. Some said the cardinals melted it down. Others claimed it was buried with him. Both lies. The ruby caught the faint light and bled it back redder, deeper, wetter. He meant only to look, to catalog, to prove to himself that after everything, the burning tape, the judging hand, the weeping mother, he was still a priest, still in control. His fingers closed around the dome. The crystal was warm, pulsing faintly, like a throat swallowing. The moment his skin touched the ring, it slid onto his finger as if it had been waiting 500 years for the perfect fit. There was no pain at first, just a delicious coolness, like slipping into silk sheets on a fevered night. Then the voices began, not in his ears, inside the stone, inside the blood rushing through his finger, a chorus, layered like a motet from hell. A cardinal at a banquet in 1498. Rodrigo, the wine tastes strange. A rival bishop in Naples. Holy Father, mercy. Lucrezia's first husband, young and beautiful. You promised me safety. They spoke all at once, overlapping, pleading, accusing. Men, women, children. Some voices so young they hadn't yet learned to curse. Dozens, hundreds. The ruby was a prison, and every grain of dried cantarella had trapped a soul at the moment of death, suspending them in eternal suffocation. Luca tried to pull the ring off. It wouldn't budge. The gold had softened, flowing around his knuckle like warm wax, sealing itself. The voices grew louder, intimate, pressing against the inside of his skull. You feel it now, don't you? Alexander's own voice cut through the chorus, smooth as velvet soaked in venom. The weight of what power truly costs. Luca's knees hit the floor. The room tilted. The walls receded until he was kneeling in a banquet hall from another century. Long tables groaning under gold plate, flickering torches, the stench of perfume and fear. Ghostly figures in silk and scarlet turned to watch him. Their faces were purple, tongues swollen black, eyes bulging like the Pope's at the end. One figure stepped forward, modern suit beneath cardinal red. A face Luca recognized from 1,000 photographs, gentle, smiling, elected in August 1978, dead 33 days later. Albino Luciani, Pope's John Paul III. He looked exactly as he did in the official death photo, peaceful, almost serene, except his lips were blue and his eyes were open, fixed on Luca with terrible pity. You weren't supposed to find this yet, Luca. The dead Pope whispered, not until you were one of us, one of the 33. The number hit like a slap. 33 days, 33 cardinals on a list somewhere in these vaults, 33 names John Paul I had been compiling the night he died of a heart attack. The ring tightened, grinding bone. They poisoned my tea, Luciani continued, voice soft, conversational, as if remarking on the weather. 3 drops, tasteless. I felt my heart stop before I could finish the page. Page 33. Your name was going to be on it. Luca, the youngest, the one they were grooming. The banquet hall dissolved. Luca was back in the studiolo, gasping, tears and snot mixing with the ink on his chest. The ring pulsed like a leech gorging itself. Alexander's laugh echoed from the ruby, rich and paternal. Welcome to the family. Son, the Borgia never truly died. We just changed our name. The ghosts pressed closer, hands, cold, swollen, accusing, reached through the centuries to caress his face. One brushed his lips and left the taste of bitter almonds. Luca clawed at the ring until his finger bled. The blood soaked into the gold, and the voices sighed with pleasure, drinking it in. If a ring that remembers every murder it ever committed decided tonight was the night to add your name to its collection, how long do you think you could keep it from finishing the job? Because Luca still hasn't gotten it off, and somewhere deeper, something is already preparing the tea. Chapter 9. John Dee's Obsidian Mirror. The ring would not come off. Luca had tried everything. Teeth, the edge of the desk, even smashing his hand against the stone wall until Bone screamed. The Borgia bull only laughed in Alexander's voice and burrowed deeper, the ruby now pulsing in perfect sync with the inkwheel over his heart. The ghosts had gone quiet, sated for the moment, but he could feel them curled inside the gem like cats in a sunbeam made of screams. He left the studiolo with his hand wrapped in a strip torn from his cassock, the cloth already soaked through black. The corridor ahead sloped gently downward, the air growing thinner, colder, carrying a faint electric tang that made his teeth ache, ozone, like the moment before lightning. The walls here were polished obsidian, seamless, reflecting his flashlight back at him in fractured pieces, a dozen Lucas, each one more broken than the last. At the end stood a single door of English oak, bound with iron straps and studded with nails arranged in the Enochian sigils John Dee had received from his angels in the 1580s. The wood was scarred by fire, marks from the Great Fire of London, or perhaps something older, a brass plate, green with verdigris, red, speculum nigrum, Johannes de Anno Domini, 1583, non introspicere, do not look within. Luca had studied Dee in the forbidden section of the Angelicum Library, the Elizabethan magus who spoke with the angels through a black mirror of polished obsidian, dictating books in a language no human throat should form. The mirror had vanished from Mortlake after Dee's death in 1609. Rumors said Rudolph II in Prague had it. Others claimed Oliver Cromwell melted it down. The truth, whispered among a handful of Vatican exorcists, was simpler. The Holy Office seized it in 1608, declared it diabolical, and buried it where no scholar could ever gaze again. The door opened at a touch. The chamber beyond was perfectly circular, 12 feet across, the walls and floor one continuous sheet of volcanic glass so dark it seemed to absorb sound itself. In the center, on a pedestal of petrified yew, floated the mirror. It did not rest. It hovered, half an inch above the wood, rotating slowly on an invisible axis, a disk of pure black obsidian, no larger than a dinner plate, its surface polished to a depth that hurt to look at, like staring into a well that stared back. No frame, no stand, just the mirror, turning, turning, drinking the light. Luca's reflection should have appeared the moment he stepped inside. It didn't. The glass showed only darkness, absolute, velvet, starless. Then, slowly, an image formed. Not his face, a room, this room. From behind him, he was looking at the back of his own head. The reflection Luca stood exactly where he was standing now, but the cassock hung in tatters, soaked with blood that poured from a crown of wounds around the skull, nail holes, deep and deliberate. The reflection's hands were raised, palms out, stigmata weeping, and the eyes, when the reflection slowly turned, were empty sockets, cauterized black. The real Luca stumbled backward. His heel struck the threshold, and he almost fell. In the mirror, the reflection did not stumble. It smiled, a slow, terrible stretching of lips that had no business moving. Then it stepped forward, out of the glass. The surface rippled like water struck by a stone. A hand emerged first, his hand, but wrong. Fingers too long, nails split and bleeding. Then the arm, then the shoulder. The reflection climbed out of the mirror the way a swimmer climbs out of a pool. Casual, inevitable. It stood dripping black liquid that hissed where it touched the floor, leaving scorch marks shaped like Enochian letters. Luca's mouth opened in a scream that never came. The reflection tilted its head, studying him with those burnt-out eyes, and spoke with his own voice, but older, raw, as if it had been screaming for years. "You're late," it rasped. "They've been waiting." It raised its ruined hands and pointed to its chest, beneath the torn cassock. The inkwheel from the devil's page spun slowly, but the spokes were no longer 9. They were 15, one for each relic, one for each night. The reflection took a step closer. Its feet made no sound, but the temperature in the room plummeted. Frost bloomed across the obsidian walls in fractal patterns that looked disturbingly like wings. Luca finally found his voice. "You're not me. You're not real." The reflection laughed, a sound like glass dragged across stone. "I'm what you become if you keep going down. Look." It turned. Presenting its back, the cassock was shredded beneath, carved deep into the flesh with what looked like a red-hot papal key. Was a date. 22nd of November, 2025. Tonight. And beneath the date, a single word in letters still smoking. Crucifixus. The reflection faced him again. Blood so fresh, bright, began to pour from wounds that opened as Luca watched. The crown of thorns, the nail holes, the spear thrust in the side. But these were not the gentle stigmata of saints. These were raw, torn, the kind of wounds that killed slowly and in public. "I tried to stop," the reflection whispered. "After the mirror, after I saw this. But the doors only open one way." It reached out. Its fingers brushed Luca's cheek, leaving streaks of blood that burned cold. Behind the reflection, the mirror itself began to crack, not shatter, crack, in a perfect spiral starting from the center and radiating outward like a spiderweb made of screams. Through the fissures, other faces appeared, hundreds, thousands, every soul who had ever looked into Dee's glass and seen their own death waiting on the other side. The reflection leaned in until its ruined lips almost touched Luca's ear. "Run upstairs. Little priest. It breathed. Run now, and maybe you'll make it to dawn, or stay and finish what you started. Its hand closed around Luca's wrist, the one with the Borgia ring. The gold flared white hot. The ghosts inside the ruby began to scream again, louder, as if they recognized their new jailer. The reflection smiled with Luca's mouth. Your death has been waiting a long time, it said. It's impatient. Then it stepped aside, gesturing toward the door with a grace that mocked every benediction Luca had ever given. If the man you will become tomorrow stepped out of a mirror tonight, bleeding from wounds you haven't earned yet, and offered you the choice, die now and end it, or keep walking down and become him, which would you pick? Because Luca picked wrong, and the mirror followed him out. Chapter 10, The Talking Head of Jacques de Molay. Luca ran, not with purpose, blind animal panic, the kind that makes your lungs burn and your mind go mercifully blank. The mirror's reflection did not follow. It didn't need to. It was already ahead of him, waiting at every turn, bleeding from wounds that belonged to tomorrow. The obsidian corridor twisted like a serpent's gut, the walls reflecting infinite Lucas, some screaming, some smiling, all dying. His bare feet slapped against stone that grew warmer with every step, as though he were descending into the belly of something vast and furious. The ring on his finger throbbed in time with the inkwheel on his chest, a double heartbeat that wasn't his. The ghosts inside the ruby whispered poison recipes in Latin, Italian, Spanish, languages of banquets and betrayal. He could taste the canarella on his tongue now, bitter almond and despair. The corridor spat him out into a cavernous hall that hadn't existed on any Vatican map since 1314, the year the Knights Templar burned. The ceiling was lost in shadow, but iron braziers hung from chains thick as a man's thigh, filled with coals that glowed without flame, a dull, sullen red like the eyes of something watching from hell. The floor was paved with black and white marble in a checkerboard pattern, each square etched with a faded Templar cross, and at the far end, on a pedestal of rough-hewn stone, dragged here from the ruins of Paris, sat the head, Jacques de Molay, last Grand Master of the poor fellow soldiers, of Christ, and of the Temple of Solomon, burned alive on the Ile de la Cité on March 18th, 1314, along with 3 of his brothers. History says the bodies were reduced to ash. History lies. The head had been severed before the flames could claim it, by a loyal Templar sergeant, some say, or by Philip the Fair's executioner on secret orders. Smuggled south in a wine barrel, hidden in Provence, then Avignon, then finally here, beneath the one institution that inherited the Templars' wealth and their curses. The skin was leather now, stretched tight over the skull. Lips shrunk back from teeth that looked too white, too sharp. The beard was still there, singed at the ends, iron gray, matted with something dark. The eyes were gone, just hollow sockets crusted with ancient resin. But the head was turned slightly, as if listening. It only spoke when a cardinal in red passed by. That was the rule, carved into the pedestal in medieval French. Tête parle, seulement au rouge head, speaks only to the red. Luca was not a cardinal. His cassock was black with blood and ink and terror. He had no business here. Yet the head turned. The neck vertebrae cracked like dry branches as the skull rotated on its stump with impossible slowness. The empty sockets fixed on him. The mouth opened, no tongue, just blackness. And it spoke in the French of 1314, guttural, wet, furious. Tu portes le rouge que tu n'as pas encore gagné. You are wearing the red you have not yet earned. Luca froze. The voice wasn't loud. It was intimate, as if the head had leaned in close and breathed the words directly into his ear across 7 centuries. The braziers flared brighter, casting long shadows that looked like Templar mantles. He looked down at himself. His cassock was still black, but the inkwheel on his chest had changed again. The 9 spokes were now bleeding crimson, soaking through the fabric in perfect cardinal scarlet. The Borgia ring pulsed in approval. The head laughed, a sound like burning parchment. Bientôt, prêtre, bientôt tu seras l'un d'eux, et alors tu brûleras comme nous. Soon, priest, soon you will be one of them, and then you will burn like us. Luca backed away. His heel struck something soft. He looked down. A pile of red berettas, cardinal hats, dozens of them, rotting, eaten by worms, each one stained darker at the peak, as if something had been poured over them. Blood, or wine turned to blood. The head kept speaking, faster now, the medieval French spilling out like a confession no priest had ever wanted to hear. Ils ont pris notre or, ils ont pris nos secrets, ils ont pris nos os, et maintenant ils prennent nos malédictions. They took our gold, they took our secrets, they took our bones, and now they take our curses. The braziers roared. Flames finally burst from the coals, blue, unnatural, the color of Greek fire. In the sudden light, Luca saw the walls were lined with more heads, smaller children, perhaps, or novices, all mummified, all facing the pedestal, all listening. He turned to run and walked straight into Cardinal Victor Dresner. The man had not been there a heartbeat ago. Now he filled the doorway, tall and gaunt, his scarlet cassock pristine. Too pristine, the red was wet, shining, as if he'd just stepped out of a baptismal font filled with blood. His face was calm, almost kind, the way executioners sometimes look before they lower the hood. Father Moretti, the cardinal said softly, in perfect Italian, you've gone far enough. Luca tried to speak. Nothing came out. The head of Jacques de Molay laughed again, a sound that made the braziers flare higher. Dresner stepped forward. The scarlet fabric left wet prints on the marble. Not wine, not paint. Blood, fresh. It dripped from the hem in steady drops that hissed where they touched the Templar crosses. You weren't meant to see this, the cardinal continued, voice gentle, paternal. Not yet, but the head always knows. It smells the red before it's earned. He reached out and touched Luca's chest, right over the inkwheel bleeding through the cassock. His fingers came away crimson. Beautiful work, Dresner murmured. The monks did well, and the Madonna. She always marks her favorites. Luca found his voice. You knew all of this? You let me? I guided you, Dresner corrected. Every door opened because you were ready. The church needs a new martyr. Luca, someone young, someone pure enough to bleed convincingly. The cardinal smiled. His teeth were very white. tomorrow in St. Peter's Square, he said, echoing the chronovisor's burning tape. The world will watch a priest crucified for his faith. They'll call it terrorism. We'll call it revelation. Behind him, the head of Jacques de Molay began to chant in Latin, the curse he had screamed as the flames took him in 1814, Pape Clément, Chevalier Guillaume, Roi Philippe, avant un an. Je vous cite apparaître au tribunal de Dieu. Pope Clément, Knight William, King Philip, before a year is out, I summon you to the tribunal of heaven. Dresdner's smile widened. He always gets the words wrong now. The cardinal said almost fondly, It's been 700 years. Memory fades. He leaned in close, the blood from his cassock soaking into Luca's. Welcome to the red, Father Moretti. It suits you. If the last Templar's severed head looked at you tonight and named you the next cardinal, knowing the red you'd wear would be your own blood, would you kneel and accept the honor, or would you finally start running upstairs toward a dawn that might never come, because Luca knelt and the head kept cursing in perfect, beautiful French. Chapter 11. The True Fragment of the Holy Lance. Luca's knees hit the marble so hard, the impact jarred his spine, but the pain felt distant, like it belonged to someone else. Cardinal Dresdner's blood-soaked hand still rested on his chest. Fingers spread over the inkwheel as if claiming ownership. The scarlet cassock dripped steadily, each drop striking the Templar crosses and sizzling like acid on holy ground. Jacques de Molay's head had fallen silent, but the curse hung in the air, thick as smoke. Dresdner smiled the way a father smiles at a child who has just learned to walk toward the edge of a cliff. You're almost ready, the cardinal whispered. One more station, one more wound. He stepped aside with theatrical grace, revealing a door that hadn't been there a heartbeat ago. Plain iron, no handle, a single slit at eye level like a confessional. Through the slit glowed a light the color of old blood left in sunlight. Luca tried to stand. His legs wouldn't obey. The ring on his finger tightened again, the ruby flaring as if feeding. The ink on his chest burned cold. Dresdner placed a gentle hand between his shoulder blades and pushed. He fell forward. The door swung inward on silent hinges. The chamber beyond was small, austere, almost tender in its cruelty. A single shaft of red light fell from a slit in the ceiling onto a velvet cushion the color of arterial spray. On the cushion rested the fragment, not the pretty Vienna spear with its golden sheath and tourist plaques, not the Armenian version or the one in Krakow. This was the true tip, the iron head that had actually pierced divine flesh on Golgotha, 4 inches long, blackened with age and something darker, the edges still sharp enough to part soul from body. A single drop of something viscous trembled at the point, refusing to fall. It had been trembling for 2,000 years. Historians argue over which spear is real. The Church lets them argue. The fragment beneath Rome never entered the debate, because no one who touched it since lived long enough to speak of it. Luca knew the stories. The Lanza of Longinus grants victory to whoever holds it. Hitler believed that, which is why the Vatican hid this piece in 1938 and never admitted it existed. But the stories never mention the price. The spear remembers the wound it gave God, and it demands symmetry. Dresner's voice came from behind him, soft, almost loving. Touch it. Luca, complete the circuit. You've worn the crown. You've tasted the poison. You've seen your death. Now feel the sin that earns it. Luca crawled. The marble was warm here, almost feverish. When he reached the cushion, his shadow fell across the spear, and the metal drank it, the red light dimming as if the fragment had taken a breath. He didn't mean to touch it. His hand moved without permission, drawn by the same hook that had pulled him down every staircase. Through every door, his fingers closed around the iron. The world ended, not in fire or thunder, in memory. He was back in the secret archive, 3 hours ago, or 3 lifetimes, kneeling beside Sister Chiara as she bled from ears and eyes and mouth. The parchment of the third secret had done its work on her first, the old nun who had guarded the vaults for 50 years, who had pressed her rosary of human skin into his palm and begged him to leave the door closed. In the vision, he saw himself clearly, younger, cleaner, terrified but determined. He had cradled her head, whispering absolution, while his other hand rifled her habit for the master key she wore around her neck. She had tried to speak, blood bubbling on her lips, but he shushed her. Peace, sister, go to God. He had taken the key. He had left her dying on the cold floor. He had told himself it was mercy, that she was already gone, that the secret mattered more than one old woman. He had lied. Now he felt it happen again, but this time from her side, the betrayal in real time, in his own flesh, his lungs filled with blood, his ears burst with wet pops, his eyes wept crimson that tasted of myrrh and maternal grief. He felt every second of her death as if it were his own, the confusion, the hurt, the realization that the priest she had protected for years had chosen curiosity over charity. The pain was absolute, intimate, maternal. She had loved him like a son, and he had killed her for a door. He screamed, or tried to. Blood poured from his mouth onto the marble, joining the puddle already there. The spear in his hand grew hot, then cold, then hot again, the temperature of living flesh. Then the vision shifted, not the past anymore, the future. He saw himself tomorrow, no, tonight, in the archives above, dragging Sister Chiara's body to the very door he had opened, saw himself propping her against it, like a sacrifice, using her blood to trace the final sigil that would seal the vaults forever, saw himself whispering, "I'm sorry," even as he turned the key and left her on the wrong side, the sin he hadn't committed yet, but would. The spear made sure of that. The pain in his side began then, a sudden, tearing agony just below the ribs. He looked down. His cassock was blooming red, the fabric parting as if sliced by an invisible blade. The wound opened in perfect imitation of the one on Calvary, 4 inches long, deep enough to show bone, blood pouring in a steady stream that steamed on the marble. He dropped the spear. It did not fall. It hovered, point down, dripping his blood back onto the cushion in perfect, measured drops. Dresner's laughter echoed from the doorway, soft and paternal. "The 5th wound," the cardinal said, "the one that kills the heart before the body. You always were ambitious, Luca. Betrayal is the fastest path to red." Luca pressed both hands to the wound. Blood seeped between his fingers, hot and real. The pain was a living thing, gnawing deeper with every heartbeat. Through blurring vision, he saw the spear tip rotate slowly, pointing now not at him, but past him, toward the next door that hadn't been there a moment ago. If the weapon that killed God decided tonight that your worst sin wasn't something you did, but something you will do, and started carving that sin into your flesh before you even committed it, how do you confess a betrayal that hasn't happened yet? Because Luca tried, and the spear just opened the wound wider, waiting for the sin to catch up. Chapter 12, Level 7, The 12 Unburied Popes. The spear's wound in Luca's side wept without ceasing, a slow seep that soaked his cassock to the skin and left a trail of crimson droplets behind him, like breadcrumbs for something ravenous. Each step sent fresh fire lancing through his ribs, but the pain had a rhythm now, almost hypnotic, syncing with the distant tolling of bells that no longer marked hours but sins. Dresner's touch lingered on his back like a brand, the cardinal's blood mingling with his own in a communion neither had blessed. The door to the next chamber had appeared without fanfare, a simple archway of unadorned stone, exhaling air that tasted of wax and wilted laurel. He crossed the threshold alone. Dresner had vanished the moment the spear's light dimmed, melting into shadow with a murmur that echoed the Templar's curse. The red waits for no one. The archway sealed behind him with a sigh of settling mortar, leaving Luca in a space that defied the geometry of the vaults above. No corridor this time, no descent, just a vast sub-basement that unfolded like a forgotten dream, its floor sloping imperceptibly into gloom where the flashlight beam lost its nerve and died. Level 7, not on any Vatican map, not even the ones etched in the minds of the oldest Swiss guards. The air down here was stagnant, heavy with the preserved chill of cryogenic vaults crossed with the musty piety of a papal crypt. No braziers or niches, just endless ranks of glass coffins, arranged in 2 parallel rows of 6, stretching into a darkness that whispered of finality. The glass was thick, bulletproof, etched with faint fleur-de-lis patterns that caught the light like frost on a winter grave. Beneath each lid, a figure lay in state, men in white silk and gold-embroidered vestments, faces serene as death masks, hands folded over pectoral crosses that gleamed dully. The 12 unburied popes. Luca knew their names without reading the plaques, the ones who died mysteriously, their obits vague as smoke. John Paul I in 1978, gone in his sleep after 33 days. No autopsy allowed. Pius XI in 1939, felled by a heart attack the night before he could sign a secret concordat with Mussolini. Innocent VIII in 1492, dead from exhaustion after confessing to fathering children out of wedlock. Urban VII in 1590, poisoned by figs or fever, reigning 12 days. And the others, whispers of hemlock in chalices, arsenic in anointing oils, shadows in the confessional who knew too much. The church buried them with pomp, but never their secrets. Their bodies stayed here, incorrupt, waiting for judgment or resurrection, whichever came first. He moved between the rows like a mourner at a mass grave, the wound in his side pulsing with every breath. The first coffin held Gregory XV, dead in 1591 from melancholy, his face pale as alabaster, lips parted as if mid-prayer. Luca leaned closer, breath fogging the glass, and for a moment he swore the Pope's fingers twitched. A trick of the light, surely, The next, Clement XIV, the suppressor of the Jesuits in 773, his eyes closed but lids veined blue, as if the weight of excommunication had bruised him from the inside. The air grew colder with each coffin, the chill seeping into Luca's bones like holy water poured on unholy ground. His flashlight trembled, casting elongated shadows that danced across the glass like specters attending vespers. He paused at the fifth coffin, Pius XIII, the reluctant pope of World War II, his features gaunt, the triple tiara resting crooked on his mummified brow. Rumors said he had seen angels in the Vatican gardens, warning of gas chambers and fire from the sky. Luca pressed a palm to the glass, whispering a half-remembered orison, and felt a faint vibration beneath his skin, not the Pope stirring, the glass itself humming low, like a tuning fork struck by distant thunder. Halfway down the row, the pattern broke. The 11th coffin was empty, no body, no vestments, just a void of black velvet lining, pristine as fresh shrouded earth. The plaque at the foot was brass, recently polished, engraved in precise Latin with a date left blank, Reservatum Papae quia perit, quod clausum esse debeat, reserved for the Pope who opens what should stay closed. Luca's reflection stared back from the glass, distorted by the curve, his face a pale smear above the Borgia ring and the bleeding wheel. The wound in his side chose that moment to flare, hot and insistent, as if the spear fragment had burrowed deeper, seeking his heart. He clutched the edge of the coffin, breath ragged, and leaned in to read the inscription again. His own name flickered in the condensation on the glass, unbidden, then vanished. A sound cut the silence, not a creak, not a whisper. The lid lifted slowly, deliberately, hinges silent as sin, the heavy glass rising on invisible pneumatics until it hovered 6 inches above the velvet, balanced on nothing. Cold air rushed out from the void below, carrying the faint scent of embalming fluid and something sweeter, lilies, perhaps, or the perfume of a funeral mass never held. Luca staggered back. His flashlight clattered to the floor, rolling between coffins, its beams spinning wild shadows that made the dead popes seem to sit up, their folded hands unfolding like paper cranes taking flight. The empty coffin gaped like an open mouth, the velvet inside pristine, but for a single indentation in the center, the faint outline of a body that had never lain there, as if the glass remembered a weight it had yet to bear. From the darkness below came a sigh, not human, deeper, like the vaults themselves exhaling after centuries of held breath. Luca's wound answered it, pulsing in sympathy, blood trickling faster now, soaking his belt and pooling at his feet. He reached for the rosary at his throat, Sister Chiara's gift, the one made of skin he had ignored. But his fingers closed on empty air. It was gone, lost somewhere in the descent, or perhaps taken by the hand that judged. The lid hovered higher, 8 inches, 10. The void widened, and with it came the cold, a bone-deep frost that numbed his legs, creeping up his thighs like frostbite claiming a mountaineer. He could see now, stairs descending from the coffin's base, narrow and spiraling, carved from the same black marble as the floor, not a coffin at all, a gateway, reserved for the one who would open the final seal. Footsteps echoed from below, soft, measured, not Dresdner's polished boots, These were bare, slapping wetly against stone slick with something viscous. Luca's breath hitched. The wound in his side tore wider, unbidden, the skin parting another inch as if the spear had decided to finish its work here, in this antechamber of the unburied. The footsteps grew louder, closer. A figure emerged from the spiral stairs, climbing into the empty coffin like a penitent ascending a pulpit. It was a man, slight and stooped, dressed in white linen soaked to translucence. His face was hidden in shadow, but the hands, oh, the hands were gnarled, veined, ending in nails bitten to the quick. They gripped the edges of the glass, pulling the body up with a wet suck. Luca's scream finally broke free, raw and animal. The figure turned. It was John Paul affirmed again, or what the poison had left of him, skin slack and mottled, eyes milky but alive with accusation. The smile was gentle, the same one from the ring's ghosts. "You opened it," the Pope whispered, voice bubbling like blood in a drowned lung. "Now lie down. The red needs a shepherd." The lid began to descend. Luca lunged, slamming his palms against the glass. It didn't budge. The figure inside reached up, fingers brushing his through the barrier, cold as the Tiber in January. The touch sent visions flashing, popes rising from their coffins one by one, their mysterious deaths unraveling like poorly tied knots, poisoned wafers, strangled in sleep, hearts stopped by whispers in the dark, all to keep the vaults closed, all to keep level 7 buried. The lid lowered another inch. The figure's hand pressed harder, and Luca felt his own wound mirror it, a second tear opening on his opposite side, symmetrical, the flesh parting to reveal rib and lung. Blood filled his mouth, coppery and thick. He choked, vision blurring, the unburied popes watching from their glass prisons with eyes that no longer closed in death. If 12 dead popes watched you tonight from their coffins, waiting for you to fill the empty one reserved just for you, would you fight the lid closing over your face, or would you finally lie down and let the church bury you alive? Because something in the dark below was already climbing the stairs, and it wore white. Chapter 13, John Paul for his unsigned constitution. The figure in the empty coffin didn't climb fully into the light. It hovered there, half emerged from the spiral stairs below, its white linen clinging wetly to limbs that bent wrong, as if gravity had forgotten how to pull on the dead. John Paul the Furrer's face, or what the poison had twisted it into, tilted upward, milky eyes catching the dying beam of Luca's fallen flashlight, like opals in a sewer grate. The smile widened, not in welcome, but in the slack-jawed rictus of a man who had swallowed his last breath mid-laughter. Bubbles of dark fluid gathered at the corners of his mouth, popping silently, releasing a faint, sickly sweet odor that cut through the embalming chill, calomel and regret. The ghost of a medicine cabinet raid gone wrong. Luca's hands scrabbled against the glass edge, nails splintering on the unyielding surface. But the lid continued its inexorable descent, inching down like a guillotine blade tempered in mercy's forge. The air thickened, pressing on his eardrums with the weight of unabsolved conclaves, and for a fleeting second, he glimpsed the stairs below, not stone, but vertebrae stacked in grotesque mimicry of a spine, descending into a chamber where shadows moved with purpose, folding and unfolding like the wings of something vast and larval. A hand, John Paul III's hand, small and scholar's fine, pushed up from below, palm flat against the underside of the lid. The glass trembled but held. The Pope's voice bubbled up again, not from his throat, but from the wound in Luca's side, vibrating through his ribs like a tuning fork struck against bone. "Read it," the voice urged, soft as a bedtime story for the damned. The words I couldn't finish, the names that would have saved us all. The lid halted, hovering an inch from the figure's crown. As if granted a reprieve, the hand withdrew, and the body sank back into the void with a wet slurp, leaving only a smeared handprint on the glass, 5 fingers, and a papal ring that glinted gold in the gloom. The stairs folded in on themselves, the vertebrae grinding like millstones, and the coffin sealed once more, pristine as if no violation had occurred. But the plaque at its foot had changed. The blank date now read 22 of Novembris, 2025, tonight. Luca collapsed against the nearest occupied coffin, his breath ragged, the wound in his side a furnace stoking coals of fresh agony. The unburied popes lay serene around him, their faces lit by the erratic spin of his flashlight. But now he noticed the details he'd overlooked in panic. Faint smiles on lips long still, eyelids that didn't quite meet, fingers curled not in prayer, but in subtle gestures, thumbs and forefingers forming circles, as if sealing pacts with the unseen. Pius Iphigenia's hand clutched a crumpled sheet of vellum, edges frayed. Innocent Eight's pectoral cross bore scratches that, in the stuttering light, spelled numbers. 33. The air hummed again, deeper this time, a vibration that rattled the glass lids like wind chimes in a hurricane's hush. From the direction of the sealed archway came a scraping, not footsteps, but paper on stone, slow, deliberate, as if a scribe were dragging a quill across eternity. Luca pushed himself up, every muscle screaming, and limped toward the sound, the trail of his blood smearing across the marble like an accusation in red ink. The scraping led him to a low alcove at the row's end, half hidden behind the 12th coffin, Urban VII's the 12-day Pope, his face frozen in mid-sneeze, as if God had called him home mid-prayer. The alcove held a writing desk of worm-eaten walnut, its surface scarred by quill nicks and wax spills. On it lay a single document, unbound, its pages fanned like a dying hand's fingers. The top sheet bore a wax seal, cracked but intact, the keys of heaven and earth, crossed over a tiara that seemed to sag under invisible weight. Apostolic Constitution, unsigned, dated August 26, 1978, the night John Paul I died. Luca's scholarly instincts warred with the terror clawing his throat, but the pull was magnetic, the same inexorable draw that had lured him through every relic. He lifted the first page with trembling fingers, the paper crackling like dry leaves underfoot in an autumn no one survived. The script was Luciani's own, neat, hurried, the ink still faintly glossy, as if penned hours ago rather than decades. Historians had long debated the Pope's final hours. Did he pen a reform manifesto against the Vatican Bank's shadows? Or was it a heart-seizing mid-thought? The official line, natural causes, a pontiff too frail for the throne. But whispers in the curia spoke of darker drafts, pages burned in the papal stove, naming names that could topple empires of faith and finance. The Constitution began innocently enough, calls for transparency in the Istituto per le Opere di Religione, the Vatican's shadowed vault, where holy donations mingled with unholy ledgers. But as Luca turned the pages, the tone shifted, accusatory, fevered, the handwriting sloping like a man racing death. The shepherds have become wolves, Luciani wrote, and the fold bleeds gold into the jaws of the abyss. He detailed rituals in hidden chapels, cardinals in crimson robes chanting over ledgers bound in human skin, invoking not Christ, but older names, Mammon, Asmodeus, while billions flowed from laundered charities to accounts in Liechtenstein and beyond, occult finance. The Pope called it not mere corruption, but a sacrament of avarice, where each transaction sealed a soul. The list began on page 29, 33 names, each a cardinal, each implicated in the rites. Luca's eyes scanned them like a confessor hearing mortal sins, names he knew from consistories and corridors, the financier from Milan who blessed arms deals disguised as pilgrim funds, the diplomat from Vienna who traded indulgences for silence on sex scandals, the liturgist from Rome who etched sigils into chalices during midnight masses. 32 names, each a dagger to the church's heart, each backed by dates, account numbers, fragments of incantations scrawled in margins. His finger trembled over the 33rd. He read it aloud, the words slipping unbidden from lips numb with dread. Victor Dresdner, prefect of the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith, architect of the Pacts. The lights died, not flickered, died. The flashlight beam snuffed like a candle pinched between fingers, plunging level 7 into a blackness so profound it pressed against Luca's eyeballs. A velvet void that muffled even his gasp. The air turned electric, ozone sharp, the prelude to a storm trapped underground. And then the sound, a chorus of lids lifting, 12 in unison, glass scraping stone with the precision of a requiem orchestra tuning for apocalypse. They rose. The unburied popes sat up in their coffins, movements synchronized, vestments rustling like dry wings. Gregory the Prune's eyes snapped open, milky but gleaming. Clement XIV's hand flexed, crushing his pectoral cross into powder that sifted like ash. Pius the Highsoon tilted his head, listening to frequencies only the dead could hear. Innocent Al-Air's lips moved in silent prayer or curse, while Urban VII sneezed once, a puff of dust that carried the scent of figs, long rotten. They did not speak. They watched. 12 pairs of eyes, or sockets, or voids, fixed on Luca, their faces illuminated by the faint phosphorescence of their own incorrupt flesh, glowing like bioluminescent fungi in a cave of the damned. The empty coffin at the row's end yawned wider, its lid fully raised now, the velvet inside undulating like a living shroud, waiting. From the darkness behind the rising figures came footsteps, heavy, deliberate, shod in polished leather that echoed off the marble like gunshots in a cathedral. A match flared, sulfur bloomed, sharp and nostalgic, the smell of childhood Easter vigils gone wrong in its yellow flicker. A face emerged, Cardinal Dresdner, standing at the alcove's edge, the unsigned Constitution clutched in one hand like a discarded sermon. He was smiling, not the paternal smirk from the Templar Hall. This was wider, teeth bared in a grin that split his face from ear to ear, shadows pooling in the creases like ink in a madman's ledger. His scarlet cassock hung dry now, pristine, but the air around him shimmered with heat, as if he carried an invisible pyre in his chest. The match illuminated the page he held, the 33rd name circled in fresh red, underlined thrice. "You read it perfectly, Luca," Dresner said, voice warm as spiced wine at a poisoned feast. "Just like I knew you would. The 33rd, the betrayer, the one who opens the final seal." The popes turned as one, their heads swiveling with faint cracks of desiccated cartilage, eyes locking on the cardinal, but they did not rise against him. They knelt in their coffins, foreheads touching glass, murmuring in unison a litany of names, dates, rituals, the Constitution's words spilling from their lipless mouths like a confession broadcast to the void. Dresner stepped forward, the match burning low, casting his shadow long and forked across the rows. He extended the document toward Luca, the circled name glistening wet. "It's always been you, groomed from Milan. The Borgia ring chose you. The spear marked you. Even your mother's face on the Madonna. It was a kindness, a reminder of what you'd sacrifice for the red." Luca's back hit the empty coffin. The velvet inside shifted, tendrils of shadow reaching up like welcoming arms. The Pope's chant grew louder, the air vibrating with their voices, ancient Latin laced with modern ledgers. Mamonix Audi knows, 33 seals, the wolf in shepherd's cloth. Dresner's smile never wavered. He blew out the match. Darkness swallowed them whole, but in that instant, Luca saw it. The cardinal's eyes, not human, but twin rubies, pulsing like the Borgia gem on his finger. And behind Dresner, rising from the shadows between coffins, 32 more figures, cardinals, all in crimson, faces obscured but hands extended, each bearing a fragment of the Constitution like indictments in a trial of the damned. The 33rd Pact. If 33 dead popes chanted your name tonight from their glass prisons, while the man who orchestrated their silence smiled in the dark and invited you to join the rite, would you sign the Constitution with your own blood? Or would you finally understand that some thrones are built on the bones of the betrayed, because in the blackness, Dresner's hand found Luca's, guiding it toward the waiting velvet, and the popes began to sing. Chapter 14, The Child Beneath St. Peter's. The chant of the unburied popes didn't fade with the snuffed match. It burrowed, a subterranean hum that vibrated through the marble soles of Luca's feet and up into his teeth, loosening them like confessions pried from a reluctant tongue. In the pitch black of level 7, the rising figures moved not as one, but in subtle discord. Gregory the First's joints popping like knuckles cracked in prayer. Clement XIII's vestments whispering against glass as his fingers drummed an absent rhythm on the lid's edge. Dresner's grip on Luca's hand was ironclad, the cardinal's palm slick with something warmer than sweat, guiding him forward through the void toward the empty coffin that yawned like a mouth mid-yawn, velvet throat pulsing faintly in the dark. "Sing with them," Dresner murmured, his breath hot against Luca's ear, carrying the faint aftertaste of sulfur and sacramental wine gone to vinegar. "The Constitution needs a witness, 33 voices to seal the pact." Luca's lips parted against his will, the words forming unbidden, a fragment of the litany, Mammon exaudinos, the plea twisting in his throat so it's like a hook sunk deep. The popes answered, their chorus swelling from murmurs to a baritone swell that shook dust from the unseen ceiling, fine particles sifting down like manna turned to ash, but beneath it, a new sound, high, reedy, almost tuneless, a child's voice, piping from the spiral stairs of the empty coffin, singing a counterpoint in a language older than Latin, older than the keys of heaven. The hum cut off. Silence crashed down. Absolute. The kind that rings in your ears after a bell tower falls. Dresner released Luca's hand with a soft chuckle, the sound echoing off the glass like laughter from a drowning man. Listen, the cardinal said, voice dropping to a conspirator's hush. The little one calls. He always does when the names are read. Luca's wound throbbed in sympathy, the spear's tear in his side widening another fraction, blood trickling warm down his hip to pool in his shoe. He backed away from the empty coffin, boots squelching, until his calves struck the raised edge of Pius XII's prison. The reluctant pope's hand, now free of its folded repose, reached through the half-open lid, fingers brushing Luca's ankle with the dry rasp of newsprint, not grabbing, caressing, as if measuring him for a shroud. The child's song grew clearer, emerging from the velvet-lined void like smoke from a censer overturned in haste. It wasn't words at first, just a melody, plaintive, off-key, the kind a boy might hum while skipping stones across the Jordan, unaware of the empire gathering at his heels. Then syllables, Aramaic, first century pure, the dialect of fishermen and tax collectors, untainted by the gloss of later scribes. They buried me with the Nazarene's shadow, but the stone rolled wrong. Dresner lit another match, the flare illuminating his grin like a jack-o'-lantern carved from Holy Writ. The light caught the empty coffin's interior, the velvet no longer still, but rippling like water, disturbed by a submerged stone. From the spiral stairs below rose a faint glow, not the red of the spear chamber, but a sickly pearl, the color of mother-of-pearl linings in a mussel shell pried open too soon. The cardinal extended the match toward the void. Go on, Luca, meet the 13th, the one we dug up to keep the lie intact. Luca's legs moved of their own accord, drawn by the song, the hum in his bones sinking with its rhythm. He peered over the coffin's edge, the pearl light bathing his face in a sheen that made his skin crawl, as if invisible pearls were forming beneath it. The stairs descended only 3 turns, vertebrae steps slick with condensation, before opening into a subchamber no larger than a baptistry font, its walls rough-hewn tough from the catacomb's deepest vein. In the center, on a slab of unpolished basalt, lay the child, or what remained of him, excavated in 1953 during structural reinforcements beneath the high altar of St. Peter's Basilica, directly under the spot where the first pope's bones were enshrined. The workers, hardened Sicilians who'd tunneled through Nero's circus, had unearthed the skeleton mid-shift, their picks striking bone with a dull thunk that echoed up to the confessio above. A boy, no more than 8 or 9, curled fetal on his side, limbs fragile as bird wings, ribs splayed like the bars of a tiny cage. No grave goods, no shroud, just the bones, yellowed but intact, arranged as if the earth had cradled him gently for 2 millennia. The church hushed it up, of course. Byzantine child, the official report claimed, reburied with quiet rites in the Vatican necropolis. But the whispers among the excavators over Grappa and Trastevere taverns spoke of anomalies. The skull, too elongated. The teeth filed in patterns no Roman child would bear. The tiny hand clenched around a scrap of vellum no bigger than a host wafer. That vellum lay open now on the basalt slab, illuminated by the pearl glow emanating from the bones themselves. Aramaic script, faded but legible. The ink a rust brown that flaked like dried blood under Luca's gaze. They lied about the resurrection. The words hit like a lash. Luca's vision swam. The spear wound in his side, flaring hot, as if the iron tip had twisted deeper, seeking the lie at his core. He'd preached it 1,000 times. The empty tomb, the folded linens, the women running with joy. But here, in the child's fist, was the contradiction. The note clutched so tight the bones had cracked around it. Dresdener's match burned low, the flame-dancing shadows across the chamber that made the skeleton's ribs flex like bellows. Mitochondrial DNA, the cardinal said conversationally, as if discussing vintages over dinner. Tested in 54, results sealed by Pius XIII himself, matches samples from the House of David, allegedly. The kind they say runs in certain bloodlines, the ones that whisper of a different ending to the story, not ascension, substitution. Luca's hand hovered over the bones, drawn inexorably. The child's song now a lullaby in his skull. The stone rolled wrong, and they put me in his place. The fingers, tiny phalanges no thicker than twigs, were curled around the vellum, but as his shadow fell across the slab, they uncurled, slowly, joints popping with the dry snap of parchment breaking free from a binding. The pearl light intensified, casting the chamber in a nacreous haze that turned the tough walls translucent, revealing veins of quartz pulsing like arteries. Luca's reflection swam in the bone's glow, his face gaunt, eyes hollowed by the descent, the Borgia ring winking like a third eye. He touched the vellum, God forgive him. He touched it, and the child sat up. No rattle of bones, no clatter of ivory on basalt. The skeleton unfolded with liquid grace, vertebrae realigning with faint clicks, like rosary beads spilled and gathered. The skull tilted, empty orbits fixing on Luca with a gaze that bored through flesh to the lies coiled in his marrow. The ribcage expanded, drawing breath that whistled through absent lungs, and the tiny hand, intact, fleshless, perfect, reached up. Index finger extended like a teacher, silencing a wayward pupil. It pressed against his lips, cold as the Jordan in flood season, the bone tip parting his mouth with gentle insistence, sliding past teeth to rest on his tongue. Luca gagged, the taste exploding, chalk and copper, the dry rot of scrolls unrolled in haste, mingled with something sweeter, milk, perhaps, or the nectar of a myth denied. The child's orbit sockets darkened, filling with shadow that pooled like ink, and from that void came the voice, not piped now but resonant, ancient, the timbre of a boy who had seen the tomb sealed from the inside. They put me there, the child whispered, finger tracing the shape of the lie on Luca's palate. The Nazarene walked free. I took the nails for him, for the bloodline, for the story they needed to sell. Luca's mind reeled, visions flooding unbidden, a dimly lit upper room in Jerusalem. 33 AD, not the Last Supper, but a council of whispers, disciples arguing, a boy dragged forward, small and uncomplaining, his veins blue with Davidic promise, the swap in the garden, not angels rolling stone, but hands in the dark, substituting a martyr's corpse for the risen one, preserving the secret that resurrection was sleight of hand, a theological slight to birth an empire. The child's finger pressed harder, drawing blood from Luca's gum, the pearl light flaring as if feeding on the offering. Dresner's laughter echoed from above, the match relit in the alcove, casting his silhouette long and lupine across the stairs. The 13th apostle, the cardinal called down, voice laced with paternal pride. The one the Gospels erased. We found him in 53, right under Peter's bones. Poetic? No, the DNA confirmed it, straight from Jesse's line. The royal stutter, but the note. Oh, the note. It named the lie and lies. Luca are the mortar that holds the church together. The child's hand withdrew, but not before tracing a final sigil on Luca's lip, a fish, reversed, mouth gaping as if swallowing its tail. The skeleton settled back onto the slab, bones folding fetal once more, but the orbits stayed fixed, watching. The pearl light dimmed to a guttering ember, the chamber's walls solidifying, the vellum crumbling to dust in Luca's palm, dust that itched, burrowing under his nails like secrets, refusing burial. He staggered up the vertebrae stairs, the child's whisper chasing him. Tell them, or become the next stone rolled wrong. The empty coffin waited above, lid still raised, velvet tendrils now visible in the matchlight, thin, pale, like fingers woven from spider silk. The popes had risen fully now, standing in their glass prisons like effigies at a black mass. Their chant resumed but altered, incorporating the child's lullaby, lied about the blood, lied about the stone. Dresner waited at the alcove, the Constitution tucked under his arm like a breviary, his smile unchanged. The bloodline calls to its own, he said, offering a hand slick with wax. David's seed, Peter's throne, all one lie, beautifully preserved. Will you add your voice, Luca, or shall we roll the stone ourselves? The wound in Luca's side answered with a fresh gush, sinking with the child's fading hum. The reversed fish on his lip, burning like a brand yet to be lit. If a 2,000-year-old child sat up from under the altar tonight, pressing his bony finger to your lips to whisper the resurrection was a royal switch, your blood the proof, your silence the seal, would you scream the truth to the popes above? Or would you swallow the note whole and let the lie bury you with the boy? Because down here, the stones don't roll for the living, they wait for the willing. Chapter 15, The Door That Opens from the Other Side. The child's finger lingered on Luca's lips long after the bone had withdrawn, its chill seeping into the soft tissue like frostbite claiming a fingertip left too long in winter's grasp. The reversed fish sigil it traced burned now, not with heat, but with the slow, insidious itch of something burrowing, a parasite of doubt, wriggling toward his throat to choke off any cry he might raise against the lie. The pearl glow from the skeleton's bones had faded to a sullen ember, casting the subchamber in a half-light that turned the tough walls into veined flesh, pulsing faintly as if the earth itself nursed a grudge 2 millennia old. The vellum dust under his nails itched too, flaking away in black specks that tasted of salt and forgotten rivers when he licked them clean in a moment of delirious compulsion. Above, the Pope's chant had fractured into dissonance, no longer a unified requiem, but a cacophony of solo voices, each unburied shepherd lamenting his own silenced end in languages dead and dying. Pious Thirteenths murmuring in flawless German about gaslit shadows in Warsaw alleys. Innocent the Eight wheezing confessions of bastard lineages in bastard Italian. Their glass lids clacked like teeth in a fever dream, not rising fully but trembling, as if the dead were testing the bars of their prisons one last time before the warden arrived. Dresdner's silhouette loomed at the top of the vertebrae stairs, his match a dying star in the alcove, illuminating the unsigned Constitution now rolled like a scroll in his fist. The 33rd name, sealed within like a devil's bargain, inked in blood. "Come up, Luca," the cardinal called, his voice a velvet noose, tightening just enough to remind without strangling. "The child has sung his part. Now it's time for the encore. The door waits. The first one, the one that breathed for you. It's lonely without its shepherd." Luca climbed, each vertebrae step grinding under his boot, like the knuckle bones of saints tossed in a game no one won. The spear wound in his side had synced with the child's hum, each throb echoing the Aramaic lullaby, stone rolled wrong, bloodline sold, until his ribs felt like a cage too small for the lie growing inside. The reversed fish on his lip split open as he crested the stairs, a thin line of blood welling that he wiped away with the back of his hand, smearing it across the Borgia ring. The ruby drank it greedily, the ghosts within stirring with a chorus of wet gasps, their pleas for breath now laced with the child's piping treble. "Tell them, or become the stone." Level 7 sprawled before him once more, transformed in the matchlight's flicker. The coffins no longer gleamed sterile. Their glass had clouded with frost-etched sigils, reversed fishes, Templar crosses inverted, ink wheels spinning counterclockwise, symbols converging like tributaries to the empty coffin at the row's end. The unburied popes had subsided but not slept. They knelt now in their prisons. Foreheads bowed to the glass, murmuring a new litany that wove the Constitution's accusations with the child's denial. Mammon's gold for David's seed, resurrection's lie, the 13th freed. Their eyes, milky, shadowed, tracked Luca's every step, not with judgment, but with the hollow envy of the damned watching a fresh soul descend. Dresdner waited at the alcove's edge. The match burned to a nub between his fingers, its flame kissing the pad of his thumb without blistering. He extinguished it with a casual pinch, plunging the sub-basement into that ringing black once more. But this time, the darkness felt alive, viscous, coiling around Luca's ankles like the velvet tendrils from the empty coffin, tugging him forward with insistent whispers. The cardinal's hand found his elbow, steering him past the kneeling popes toward a wall that hadn't been there before, the original steel door from the secret archive, the one etched with December 8th, 1965, the day the church opened to the world and sealed something else forever. It stood ajar, not from the outside, as Luca had left it hours or eternities ago. From the inside, a sliver of warmer air leaked through the gap, carrying the mingled scents of all the chambers he'd traversed, the copper tang of the third secret's blood, the ozone crackle of the chronovisor's fire, the myrrh rot of the Madonna's tears, the bitter almond of Borgia poison, the chalky milk of the child's bones. The breathing was back, but inverted now, exhaling what it had inhaled, birthing something from the vault's collective womb. Dresner pressed the Constitution into Luca's free hand, the paper warm as fresh skin, the 33rd name pulsing beneath his thumb like a second heartbeat. "Read it again," the cardinal urged, his breath stirring the hairs on Luca's neck. Aloud, "The door hungers for confession, yours most of all." Luca's lips moved against his will, the reversed fish splitting wider, blood trickling down his chin to stain the document's edge. Victor Dresner, prefect, architect. The words caught, the air thickening as if the sub-basement held its breath. The Pope's chant swelled in response, a wave crashing against the steel, and the door groaned inward, slow, deliberate, hinges silent as a tomb unsealed at dawn. From the widening gap stepped a figure, tall, gaunt, clad in scarlet cassock that hung limp, sodden, as if dragged through every chamber's gore. The face was Dresner's, high cheekbones, aquiline nose, the thin lips curled in that perpetual half-smile, but wrong. The skin sagged like wax left too near a vigil candle, folds pooling at the jawline, and the eyes, sewn shut with threads of pure gold, each stitch a papal seal, glinting in the faint afterglow of the Pope's luminescence. The needle holes wept not blood, but a viscous amber, thick as chrism oil, dripping in slow beads that sizzled on the marble. It was Dresner, and it wasn't. The thing tilted its head, the gold threads creaking like rosary beads under strain, and opened its mouth. No breath came, only the Latin phrase Luca had heard since the first descent, growing from a murmur in the walls to a roar in his veins. The words he'd mistaken for prayer, but now recognized as invocation. Domus tua, sancte pater. Over and over. The voice a layered rasp, Alexander's velvet venom, de Molay's burning curse, the child's piping denial, all woven into a single, inescapable welcome. The sewn-shut eyes fixed on Luca, or seemed to, the amber tears tracing paths down cheeks that twitched with borrowed expressions. Dresner, the real one, flesh and blood and unstitched gaze, laughed from behind, a sound like chalice wine spilling across an altar cloth. "Beautiful, isn't it?" The architect's echo. "I had it sewn when the Constitution first named me. A reminder, even the betrayer has a double. And you, Luca, you're the 30th third stitch, the one that binds it all." The thing in scarlet stepped fully into the light, its movement fluid yet marionette jerky, the gold threads pulling at lids that bulged beneath as if something inside strained to see. It extended a hand, Dresner's hand, but fingers elongated, nails blackened with ritual ink, and cupped Luca's chin, tilting his face up. The touch was cold fire, the amber tears smearing across his skin, burning the reversed fish into a scar that wept in sympathy. "Domus tua, sancta pater," it whispered again, closer now, the words brushing his ear like a lover's secret in a confessional gone wrong. The popes joined in, their chant rising to a crescendo that shook the coffins, glass cracking in spiderweb patterns that mapped the 33 pacts. The child's voice piped from below, a treble thread in the tapestry. Stone rolled wrong, bloodline sold, home for the Holy Father. Luca's vision fractured. The sub-basement blurred into overlays. The secret archive at 3:33 a.m. The breathing door exhaling his name. The chronovisor's green glow showing his crucifixion under floodlights. The Madonna's face melting into his mother's. Tears tasting of Milan rain. The ink crawling across his chest like monks reborn. The reflection stepping from the mirror. Bleeding tomorrow's wounds. De Molay's head cursing red he hadn't earned. The spear carving future betrayal in his side. The empty coffin reserving his place among the unburied. The Constitution naming Dresdner as the wolf. The child's fingers sealing the resurrection's lie with bone on lip, all converging here. At the door that opened from the other side, the thing leaned in, sewn shut eyes inches from his, the gold threads humming with stolen light. Its free hand traced the wheel on his chest, fingers dipping into the ink as if stirring a font of original sin. Welcome home, Holy Father, it translated, the Latin resolving into English with a wet pop, like a seal breaking on a forbidden host. The words weren't Dresdner's. They were the vault's collective voice. Every relic, every ghost, every buried truth speaking as one. Luca's knees buckled. The thing caught him, its embrace iron and intimate, the scarlet cassock enveloping him like a pall. Behind it, through the open door, the original chamber yawned, not the archive staircase he remembered, but an endless spiral upward, lined with faces, popes kneeling, cardinals smiling, the child singing, his mother weeping, Sister Chiara's skin rosary clicking like a countdown, and at the top, Saint, Peter's Square under a bruised sky, the obelisk casting his shadow long across the faithful, nails waiting in the wings. Dresdner, the architect, the original, stepped forward, the Constitution unfurling in his hands like a banner of surrender. You see it now, he said, voice thick with triumph and something like grief. The red isn't earned, it's inherited. The bloodline calls its own, David's seed in Peter's throne, the lie that built the church. And you, Luca, the 30th third, will seal it with your rising. The thing released him, stepping back through the door with a rustle of sodden silk, the sewn shut eyes turning inward as if gazing at the spiral's apex. The popes rose fully now, lids shattering like eggshells, their figures spilling onto the marble in a tide of white and gold, surrounding Luca in a circle of unburied judgment. The child's hand emerged from the empty coffin, beckoning with a bony curl. The spear wound split wide, the inkwheel spun to 15 spokes, the Borgia ghosts sang hosannas in poison, and the door, wide open, exhaled one final breath. Domus tua, sancta pater. Luca crossed the threshold, not falling, walking. The spiral stairs reformed beneath his feet, carrying him upward toward the square, the faithful, the nails, the lie complete, the resurrection his. If you heard that whisper while watching this, the one growing louder every night since you first clicked play, the Latin uncoiling in your ear like a thread pulled from your own chest, tell me in the comments, which door would you open? Or better yet, look behind you right now, because whatever stepped through might already be wearing your face.